So I want to talk a little bit about who was Brahms. So Brahms was a composer. You might have heard of that. He was born in northern Germany, in Hamburg, in a kind of a not wealthy part. He was not rich. He was kind of poor. His dad was a musician. That's why he was poor. But his dad was apparently a reasonably good musician, but wasn't sober that much of the time. So the income was kind of iffy. His mother was a seamstress. However, even though the money was a little iffy, they always made sure that Johannes got lessons. And he had decent lessons. After a little while, they sent him off to another city to take lessons, where he would stay with a fellow named Markson, who made sure that Brahms studied Bach. So it was really great. But the income sort of dwindled when Brahms was a teenager. He had to start playing the piano wherever he could. And the place where he could make the most money was the brothels. So he played in the brothels when he was in his middle teens, yeah. But it didn't, well, anyway, when he was about 20, he left home. He went off on a tour with a gypsy violinist. And then he met a fellow named Joseph Joachim, who was the greatest, most people consider the greatest violinist of the 19th century. He was a classical sort of violinist in a romantic era, much like Brahms was. Joachim and Brahms were lifelong friends. Joachim introduced Brahms to Robert Schumann, who was the great composer in Germany, the most influential writer about music in Germany. And Brahms and Schumann made a close connection, and he was kind of like a surrogate father to him. He was a friend and a mentor. He encouraged Brahms to write. Brahms was scared because people said, "You're really talented. You're going to be like the best next Beethoven." And so he's afraid to write a symphony. He was really scared to write his first symphony. Schumann encouraged him to write a symphony. He tried. After a while, after struggling and struggling, he said, I think there's good stuff here, but it's not ready to be a symphony yet. It became then a piece for two pianos. A little bit later, one of the great masterworks of the chamber repertoire, the F minor piano quintet. Also, some of the music wound up in the second movement of the Requiem. Schumann had a disease that was undiagnosed, and he went crazy by stages. This was a terrible blow to Brahms. He was very close with Schumann's wife, Clara, who was, by many counts, one of the greatest pianists of the 19th century. They remained close throughout. But Schumann was in an insane asylum. He got out. He tried to commit suicide. They put him back in, and then he died. It was a really great loss, and Brahms felt it for a long time. Ever since Schumann died, he'd been thinking he would write a piece of mourning, a mourning piece, a piece in honor of Schumann. But nothing really came of that except sketches for the second movement until his mother died. Brahms' mother died. He was very close to his mother, had a very difficult relationship with his father. After his mother died, he was sad, and he felt for his sister, who was even more close with the mother. So he began work on the Requiem. And so he completed a few of the movements, and then he added a few more, and finally there were 6 movements ready, and they were premiered in nearby his hometown. And this was a really important event in Brahms' life. He ruined one of his close friendships with a conductor who was about to give the premiere there by doing the premiere a couple days earlier in a nearby town, because he really, really wanted to do the premiere himself. And his father attended. And so his father, who was a very reserved man, said for the first time ever that he was proud of Brahms. And it was almost immediately hailed as a great work. Then Brahms added the 5th movement. That was the last one to be composed, the one which seems most obviously a loving tribute to his mother. And the whole work was performed the next year in the Leipzig Gewandhaus, which was a very important place, one of the most important places in Central Europe, in Germany at the time. And after this, it was performed a lot in Northern Europe and in England and all the Protestant areas, because it was using the Protestant Bible. Brahms himself chose the texts from what's usually called the Luther Bible. So King James commissioned the English version, and Martin Luther commissioned the German version. They're different, because they're translations. Things come out a little bit differently. And so this was the Luther Bible, but beyond that, it's in German, but it's also not following the usual pattern of a requiem. So there's no Day of Judgment, there's no Dies Irae stuff. There's a lot about consolation and hope and mourning for those who remain alive and have lost a loved one. That's the biggest difference between the Brahms Requiem and all the ones which came before. This is for the people who remain and for their sense of loss. Whereas all the other ones before, they're a mass in honor of the departed. This sings about the departed, but it's mostly about the ones who lose. So the very first words are Selig sind, the blessed are those who are mourning, those who have carried loss. And this idea carries along in the text. The first three notes the soprano sings, I think I told you, they sing Selig sind, and that little motive connects every movement of the piece. The only one where it's not sort of an obvious melodic thing at the beginning is the fifth movement, where the soprano solo starts. The melody, that little fragment, is in there in a significant way, but it's hidden a little bit more. Throughout the entire work, Brahms uses not only that little motive, but many others as connectors. Just a couple things I want to mention about some of the movements. Brahms later on, because of politics at that time, very quickly, you remember Napoleon? He conquered most of Europe. At that time, both Italy and Germany were little fragments of countries. There were dozens of principalities. And Napoleon came over and set them up as like, these are my German territories, and these are my Italian territories. Well, after he lost, then they went back to normal. Some people thought, it was pretty good when we were all one. And so if you remember Verdi's Requiem, the Risorgimento, bring Italy back together. That was part of that. Well, Bismarck, this fellow Otto von Bismarck, wanted to bring all of Germany together. That's what he said. Really what he wanted to do was control all of Germany. But Brahms thought Bismarck was a great guy at the beginning. He was like Napoleon. He seemed a great guy at first. Then it became obvious he wasn't. Brahms wrote a piece of Festmarch for Bismarck. But later he recognized what Bismarck was about. And so he was a little hesitant about the name, the German Requiem, because some people thought maybe this was about Germany has become Germany, and therefore this Requiem is the... No, it was just about the language. He said he wished it was... He said, I would have been happy to call it a human Requiem. He called it German because it was German language. I want to borrow the piano for just a second, Inara, just for a couple things. The way he tried to humanize the Requiem, I think, and succeeded. The second movement begins with, it's in 3/4. This figure is the upside down of Selig sind. The sopranos begin with. But so totally different, you would never think it. Sorry, wrong note. This dance, slow 3, has been called a saraband. The usual slow dance movement is a saraband. I think it's not. I think it's a German folk dance called a Ländler. The Ländler was very popular at the time, but this is a totally strange Ländler. It's in minor, it's slow. It's so slow it feels like a march, especially with this. So full of all the heaviness we didn't get in the first movement. And you remember that this second movement ends with this exciting march-like quality. It's kind of like beer hall music. Because he wants something that connects with people. So this feeling of, finally, after all this sense of grief and loss that he's talking about, it's like, yes, things will be good after we die. I'm going to go have a beer. I'm a little bit flippant, but this feeling of humanizing the whole piece is what he's trying to do. He's writing for those of us who are still alive and have had losses. It's just amazing, this piece, to me. Completely amazing and so touching.